Congressionals. I'm your host, Dr. Dave Layton, and thank you for joining me in our journey to hope. It is my desire through this podcast to bring you information about how to discover, sustain, or perhaps regain hope. In this episode, I'm honored to be speaking with Congressman Barry Loudermilk. Congressman Loudermilk is currently the Republican congressman for the 11th District in Georgia, and I'm going to let him tell us more about himself. But Congressman Loudermilk wrote a book with a fascinating title, And Then They Prayed. Well, in our discussion, I want to explore his thoughts on hope, and of course, I want to hear his thoughts on prayer. Well, hello, Congressman.
Hey, Dave, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, sir. And again, it's such an honor to have you. Thank you for that. Let's get started. Just tell our audience a little bit about yourself.
Well, it's quite an interesting story, but we won't get into too much detail there, but we do potentially having a book coming out later this year telling more about my testimony and some of the trials and tribulations that my wife and I have been through. But a little bit about myself. I'm a native Georgian. I was born and raised in Georgia, but after I graduated high school, my dad moved me to Alaska to work construction. He was a World War II vet, a combat veteran, was in on the D-Day landing all the way through Battle of the Bulge and into the occupation of Germany. And I was a latecomer. My brother and sister, 15, 16 years older than I am. And so I wasn't an only child, but raised as a child, which meant I had a lot of time with my dad. He was a contractor, worked construction, and he comes from that generation that you make it on your own. You don't seek government assistance. If there's not work where you're at, you go to where there's work. And, you know, growing up, he worked 6 days a week. The only time he worked on Sunday is if his proverbial ox was in the ditch, which sometimes my mom accused him of pushing the ox in the ditch. But which meant as a child, I spent a lot of Saturdays on job sites. And so I learned a lot from him. He was an incredibly wise man, a very, very dedicated Christian, and was one of the smartest people I ever met. And so he had a huge influence on me and my life. And so when he moved me to Alaska in 1981, after I graduated high school, I started during my free time from working construction, working in a bus ministry at the church we were affiliated with. And so doing the bus ministry, I don't know if bus ministries are still popular anymore, but it was actually, I think, God preparing me to do a campaign for public office in the future, because we would go out on Saturday and you go into a lot of times low-income neighborhoods. And I grew up in low-income housing. And so I was comfortable and I could really relate to a lot of the people. But we would go knock on doors, let them know we're bringing the church bus through the neighborhood tomorrow and would love to take you to school, to Sunday school and to church, which most of the people were very receptive. They wouldn't come, but they all would send their children. So on Sunday, we would go pick them up and take them back. Well, doing this on the weekends, I met a young lady whose parents had moved there. I think they were living in Florida at the time. And we kind of hit it off. And so we're celebrating our 43rd year of marriage coming up this month. So it shifted. My plans were to work in construction in Alaska for the summer. I had some scholarship offers to play football. I was going to come back to Georgia and play football, but I didn't return to Georgia for 15 years. Worked construction for a little longer, joined the Air Force, spent some time in the Air Force, stationed in Hawaii, and then back in Alaska was my last duty assignment, where fortunately my parents were still living there, so it was almost a home assignment. But this was at the tail end of the Cold War, and then right after Desert Storm, during the reduction in force, I was offered a job with a defense contractor because I had an SCI, high-level security clearance. And
yes,
as you know, that is more valuable to a lot of contractors than actually your skill set. And so a defense contractor who had worked with us in the intelligence community offered me a job to come on with them. So I stayed with them until my brother-in-law, who had worked, he was Air Force as well, and his time was coming up. He worked at the NSA on systems dealing with nuclear defense, and so both of us had an IT background in the military. We left the Air Force around the same time. I moved back to Georgia and started an IT business. And this is where the influence of my father really began to take hold. As we're trying to build our business here in Georgia, the state legislature was making a lot of decisions that were very harmful to small business. My wife and I were also homeschooling our children, and there was proposed legislation in the Georgia legislature that would have virtually outlawed homeschooling. So I started getting more involved politically. And my father was still living in Alaska at the time. This is in the late 1990s. And we would talk on the phone once a week or so. And so I was on the phone with him, and I was complaining about all this. And then he said, well, what are you going to do about it? And I paused for a minute, and that reminded me of something he used to teach me when I was growing up. He would tell me quite often, son, if there's something in life you don't like, you have two choices. You can do something to change the situation, or accept the status quo and go on with your life. But complaining never accomplishes anything.
Right.
So that stuck with me. And so after a lot of prayer, my wife, who is one who has never wanted to be in the public eye, right? That was just something that she wasn't accustomed to. In fact, I was asked to speak at a church one time about our providential history, which I had started teaching a lot about the Christian history of the United States. And the first time I was invited to speak at the church, she was so nervous she got sick, had to leave. So just to give you a contrast of where she was, there was opportunity to run for the Georgia State House of Representatives. And I started getting calls from some friends because we became politically active. We joined the local Republican Party, started helping others on campaigns. And so I got a call encouraging me to run for the Georgia State House. Well, the first thing I did is went to my wife, knowing what she was going to say. No, we do not need that type of attention and scrutiny. But she prayed about it, and she came to me one day and said, this is what you're supposed to do. And so we decided, okay, we're going to do something about it. So to kind of bring it all together, what got me in Congress, I spent 6 years in the Georgia State House, 3 years in the Georgia State Senate. Our member of Congress that represented our area decided to run for the U.S. Senate. It opened up that seat. I was actively helping recruit candidates for that. Yeah. I mean, this is a full-time job. I am a small business owner. I mean, you go to Congress, your life comes to a halt, right? It's full-time. You're not even allowed to participate in outside business when you're in Congress. And so I had not even considered it. And then one day my wife walks in the room and she said, you're supposed to run. And about that same time, I get a text from a very close friend who was a congressman from Georgia. And he said, you need to run for this seat. And so we took that as confirmation, and it was not something I was seeking, but I knew that this is what God was intending for me to do. And we saw it as a mission field. I mean, Washington, D.C. resembles a lot of third world countries in some aspects. So so we followed God, and we're continuing to follow him. And so that's kind of a brief synopsis of some of the high points of my life. But none of this was without significant trials and tribulations. And one thing that I've learned from being in Congress is that times of difficulty, times of tragedy aren't always detours, but often they're training. It's teaching. It's teaching you to overcome. It's teaching you. It's like when when my youngest son, he decided to go Army, and he was going airborne.
Okay.
And just before he went to boot camp, he came and sat down and talked to me. And I said, son, let me just explain something to you. It's going to be tough. It's probably going to be the toughest thing you ever have been through. And every day is going to get a little tougher. But keep in mind, what they're doing is they're preparing you for something even worse than this. Hopefully that you'll never have to do it. But just keep your eye on your cause, which is to train and to graduate, and take it one day at a time. And I was able to share with him of how Jesus taught that. If you want to find a business leader, leadership teacher, you find no more than the words of Jesus. I mean, and I shared with him to where, the scripture tells us, take no thought of tomorrow. There's enough trouble for today. What he's saying is focus on overcoming the events of now and let tomorrow take care of itself. When you get into tomorrow, you take that. Take one objective at a time, take one obstacle at a time, and overcome it. And so that's kind of been the life that my wife and I have experienced. People have asked me, if you today, if you back then knew what you were going to go through today, would you have taken that step to run for Congress? Obviously, the answer probably would have been no, because, and that's just because no one would want to go through some of the things that we've had to go through. But at the same time, God has used that to really change us and build us and increase our faith and help give us new direction.
Yeah. You and I share a lot of background. I'm retired Air Force. When did you go through basic training? Just curious.
1984.
That's wonderful. Well, in 1984, I was a TI at Lackland Air Force Base.
I was in the 3708. I went in May.
Okay.
And graduate. I mean, we were there through the 4th of July. I remember participating in a 4th of July parade.
Yeah.
And so,
here's
I was there at the same time.
Here's where you and I cross paths. I'm the guy that you love to hate and never knew it. I'm the guy who wrote your student study guide.
Oh.
I'm the one who figured out how to fold your underwear in 6-inch squares and how to put it in the
Oh.
But
I like
I
you
was
anyhow.
a TI
That's okay.
there for actually 9 years, from 1980 to in 1984, not long after, I went over to the NCO Academy at Lackland and was on staff there. But I'm sorry, I've got my dates wrong. Excuse me. In 1984, I moved up to the curriculum section at BMTS, Basic Military Training School, and wrote the curriculum and student study guides, the lesson plans, all that. And then I moved to the NCO Academy. And it was in 1990, excuse me. I retired in 96. I was part of the cadre that helped move the officer training school to Maxwell Air Force Base.
Yeah.
And I became the first sergeant at the officer training school, and then we got a real first sergeant in, and I moved. I was a superintendent of test and measurement for OTS, and then I retired. But anyway, that's great.
That's interesting. Yeah.
My first assignment was Little Rock Air Force Base. I was working in the comm center and handling message traffic. So I too had to have that SDI clearance. So I understand about that.
Well, that's what I did. After basic training, I went to Shepherd. Was at Shepherd for several months. And the one thing I tell people about Shepherd, what's so great about Wichita Falls, Texas, is you can see the tornadoes from 40 miles away.
Yep.
We're here in Georgia and, Alabama, they're on us before we know it, right? But I went from there to Hickam Air Force Base in Hawaii.
Okay.
And spent 3 years there, and then was assigned to Elmendorf, and that's where I finished up. But it's an interesting story of I went back to Hickam. The last time I was there was during Desert Shield. I was stationed at Elmendorf then, and I was sent to Hickam to help come up with a way of deploying the you'd be probably familiar with the old WMIC system, the Worldwide Military Command and Control System, which the command and control. So I was sent back there to help come up with ways to deploy that into the desert. But other than that, that's the only trip I have been back to Hawaii until the summer, August of 2024. The Select Committee on China invited me and my wife to go with them on a trans-Pacific tour. I think it was providential. Our first stop was at Elmendorf. We flew up there. It was basically a refueling overnight stop. So my wife and I had time to kind of go around the city and see the old house we used to own, and then visit a couple of hamburger places where we dated. And so from there, we went to Japan for several days, met with the prime minister, went to Korea, met with the president there, and a few other stops, and we ended up at Hickam. And so that was the first time we had both. She had not been back since we left in 1987. But as we're stepping off the plane, now on these trips, we fly an Air Force jet that looks like a smaller version of Air Force One. Same paint scheme, has United States of America across the top. It's flown by Air Force crews. I think our crew was out of Scott Air Force Base. And so we usually exclusively land at military bases and have security with us. But as we're stepping off the plane at base ops at Hickam, I looked across the flight line to where the base flagpole was, and it was at the same place. And I wasn't sure if it would be, because it's now Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam. And they've even renamed it Hickam Field, like it was back in 1941. Okay.
Yeah.
The building I worked in still had pockmarks from the Japanese attack, because Hickam was one of their primary points. And the building that I worked in, where the communications center was, during the attack on Pearl Harbor, was a barracks, predominantly a barracks. And you know, these are, a lot of times the barracks still have different operation centers there, but it was a barracks, and it took a direct bomb hit and killed over 300 airmen. And so we all knew of that. But as I'm stepping off the plane, I see the building, I see the flagpole, and my mind immediately goes back to an event that happened. And this is one of the things that God used in my life to prepare me for things in the future. And I looked and I pointed it out to my wife, and I said, "Yep, it's still there." And she said, "The sound of freedom, right?" And I said, "Exactly. You know exactly what I'm thinking." Okay. What she was talking about was an incident that happened there. And what made me think of this is what you and I have in common already. But I was on duty on Sunday, December the 7th, 1946. All right. And most people remember December the 7th, 1941 at 7:05 in the morning was when the attack, or 7:50 in the morning is when the attack happened on Hickam and Pearl Harbor and other military bases on Hawaii. Well, I was on duty that morning. It was the 45th anniversary. It was going to be a big day. I mean, you had VIPs from all over the country coming in. The largest ceremony was going to be at Pearl Harbor, but they were having a ceremony at Hickam as well. But I'm inside the top secret communications center, no windows, can't see anything. So I'm just there working. Around noon, somebody is sent to relieve me from my console so I can go get something to eat. Now, being a Sunday, most everything's quiet on base. Anything within the headquarters building, that building that was a barracks then was now the headquarters of Pacific Air Forces. So all quiet. I had to leave the building to go to the base sandwich shop, which was just past the flagpole. As I'm walking over there, I see some wreaths placed around the base of the flagpole, remnants from the ceremony earlier that morning that I unfortunately wasn't able to go to. But as I got closer, I saw there was a lone gentleman standing there, and he's wearing the garrison cap, a flight cap of a Pearl Harbor survivor. I immediately recognized it. So I made my way over to him. I just wanted to thank him for his service. But when I walked up to him and he looked at me, it was almost like he was looking through me. I could see tremendous amount of pain in his face. And you could tell he had been crying. But he's standing there alone at the base of the flagpole. And I'm wondering, should I say anything? Does he just need his privacy? But I just walked up, and before I could say anything, he looked at me and he said, "I can still hear it." Well, that took me back for a moment. And I said, "Excuse me?" He said, "I can still hear them. I can still hear them." And I said, "Hear who, sir?" So he pointed over to the building I just left, headquarters, Pacific Air Forces. He said, "I can still hear them screaming." And he
Wow.
goes on to tell me he worked as a communications operator, which is what I was.
Uh-huh.
In that building, there was where the base telecommunications center was. December 7th, 1941. Here, 45 years later, both of us who did the same job in the same building are meeting at the base of this flagpole.
Oh,
I
man.
got chills at that moment, and I'm thinking, okay, this is more than just, this is a providential meeting here.
Mm.
He goes on to tell me about the attack. And I mean, I'm just mesmerized. And then he goes, "I can still smell it."
Oh, yeah.
And I said, "Smell what, sir?" He said, "The smell of burning flesh never, ever leaves you."
Yeah.
And so we just stood there quietly, and I'm thinking, wow, what a connection here. The irony of meeting this guy. We both are in the same branch of service. We were both doing the same job in the same location, 45 years apart, two
Mm.
different generations. But now I'm experiencing what he experienced through his own
Mhm.
words. But then the irony of it was the enemy he was fighting then is our ally today. Our enemy, which was Russia, the Soviet Union at the time, was their ally during his time period, right?
Yeah.
But the whole time he's talking to me, the flag, which is at half mast
Mhm.
still, the wind, there's always wind blowing in Hawaii, but the flag had been rippling. But every now and then that metal clip that connects to the lanyard, gets the
Okay.
flag to the lanyard, would hit that metal
Mhm.
flagpole and make a ding.
Mhm.
And every now and then it would just make this distinctive ding. And he stopped and he said, "Do you hear that?" And I didn't know if he was still talking about, if he was in the present or he was still, going through the trauma that he had been through in the past. And I said, "What's that?" He said, "That sound." And I said, "The ding." He said, "Son, that's the sound of freedom."
Mhm.
He said, "Never forget what they did
Yeah.
for us." He slowly turned. Now, at this point, I've got a tear coming down my face, right? He turns and salutes the flag. I join him in a salute. When we get done, he turns and he starts walking toward the parking lot. And I'm just mesmerized. I'm just, it's unbelievable. He stops and he turns around and he said, "What's your name?" And I said, "Well, it's Senior Airman Loudermilk." He said, "No, not that. What is your name?" And I said, "It's Barry." He said, "Barry, never forget those men or what they did."
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
said, "I won't, sir." So when I step off the plane on this trip in August 2024, that whole thing comes back to me, and I realize what an impact that one person had on me at that moment. And I've
Yeah.
never, any time I hear that sound, that whole story comes right back. That sound of freedom.
That's that's an amazing story. There's moments in our life where those things happen, and
Right.
they change to our very core different things about us. And so that's a wonderful story. Thank you for sharing that. Um, I think I would have shed a few tears myself in that moment. I had the chance several years ago to uh, go to Washington, D.C. as part of a meeting we were having. And I took one afternoon off and went over to Arlington in time to tour it a little bit and also to see the changing of the guard at the Tomb of the Unknown
Right.
Soldier. Man, I describe it as I left a little bit of emotion there at Arlington because
Yeah.
you stand there and you are surrounded with incredible heroes. And all right, we could talk about this for a long
Oh,
time.
yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I want to say something, and please take it in the context. I appreciate your humanity. so many times we have this image of people either in a leadership position, whatever, and we forget that they're human too, and they face the same things that we face in our life. And uh, so I just appreciate you sharing that because it shows that. And I'm trying to transition here into our topic on hope. By the way, congratulations on you and your wife being married 43 years. That's awesome. That is awesome. My wife and I, in recently back in June, celebrated our 50th anniversary.
Wow,
And
congratulations. Yeah,
when I see an elderly couple, I always like to ask them, how long y'all been married? Because I want to celebrate that
yeah.
longevity of marriage as it's intended to be. And so congratulations on that. Okay. This podcast is about hope. And as I said, it's to help folks discover, sustain, and regain hope. I started the podcast about 3 years ago when I was recovering from leukemia. And I wrote a book called Our Journey to Hope, or I'm sorry, it's called Journey to Hope. The publisher changed the title of it. But
Yeah.
anyway, I started delving into hope, both from a spiritual perspective and also from a secular perspective. And sometimes people are not, let me say it again, sometimes people are in a situation where they're not quite ready to hear the gospel and true and lasting hope found in our Lord. They need hope or relief in the moment. And so I try to balance secular and spiritual.
Right.
Um, I mentioned in the notes that I sent you that I look at hope two different ways. There's the earthly or worldly view of I hope
Right.
something happens or doesn't happen. And then there's true and lasting hope found in our Lord. And so that's where I want to go with you. I want to hear your thoughts on hope. And then we're going to go from there. We want to talk a little bit about prayer because that's a critical part of it. But what are
Right.
your thoughts on hope?
Well, if you don't mind, I can share another story of how
Yes,
God
sir.
brought this to me in a real way. I alluded to several tragic things that have happened to my wife and I over the years, but more predominantly since we've been in Congress. And one of the earlier ones happened on June 14th, 2017. Um, in Congress, we have, the Republicans and Democrats, we each have a baseball team, and we play one
Uh-huh.
game a year, right? And it's
Uh-huh.
a charity game. It's opening season,
Yeah.
and it's opening day and the World Series all in one game. And it's usually pretty popular. We usually bring about 10,000 out. We play in the Washington National Stadium. So
Huh?
for people like me who grew up playing Little League baseball and high school baseball, this is my chance to play in the big leagues. I mean, they have the Jumbotron with your picture, and they do, the walk-up music when you go to bat and everything. So
Yeah.
it's a fun
Yeah.
event, but we take it seriously, and we practice throughout the year. Usually it
Yeah.
started about 6 o'clock in the morning. And our practice field was across the river out of D.C. in Alexandria, Virginia. This was the last day before the game. So this is the game was on June the 15th. This is June the 14th. Happened to be Flag Day and President Trump's birthday.
Okay.
But we went out to the field, started our practice. Lower attendance than normal because a lot of players, look, when you're in most of our teams in their 50s and 60s, it's fielding a healthy team by the time the game comes is priority. And after 3 months of practice, that becomes a challenge. But I had gone. One person who was there who didn't originally intend to go was Steve Scalise, who was a majority whip.
Hmm.
But it
Hmm.
was right at the end of practice. I was standing near home plate, waiting for my turn to get up at bat. And as I'm standing there, I hear a gunshot.
Oh.
And it comes from over near the third base line.
Hmm.
I look over that way. I don't see anything. But it didn't really concern me at first because where I live here in Georgia, we're pretty rural. We hear gunshots all the time, especially getting close to deer season. People are
Uh-huh.
sighting in their
Uh-huh.
rifles and everything. And usually if I'm outside, because I'm a shooter, I'm a hunter, I try to play this game in my mind, identify what type of round that was based on the report, right?
Right.
I started to do that, and then I realized, why in Alexandria, Virginia, am I hearing a gunshot?
Mm-hmm.
So the third base fence was to my right, and two Capitol Police agents who were there as security for the whip, Steve Scalise, had been sitting in their SUV, and they were pulled up close to the fence. And I thought, well, let me look at them. If they're concerned, then I'll know to be concerned. So I turned to look at the SUV, and both of the officers were getting out. They're plainclothes, but they are getting out, and they're reaching for their weapons. So I turned back, and I look over to where the shot was fired, and I heard our third baseman say, "He's got a gun, run." So we have a lot of assistant coaches and staffers on the field. We bring in a lot of congressional staff, even some of the White House staff who had played college ball will come out and help us practice and coach, right? So that's who mostly was in the outfield, and we had a staffer pitching, but it was members of Congress who were in the infield and batting. Our third baseman hollered, "He's got a gun, run." So I start running up the first baseline, and shots start regularly ringing out.
Okay.
Most everybody's running into the dugout, but I remembered from both my Air Force training and the training I've been through for executive protection, that dugout was the definition of the exact wrong place to be. Because it is, because even though it was subterranean, it was a real dugout with concrete walls. The only entrance and exit was onto the field of fire.
Mm-hmm.
There was no way to get out. You had to get back on the field. I had to assume wherever the shooter was, he's coming on the field. So I took a longer path to get out of the field. There was a gate that went out toward the seating and the parking area on the first base side. As I'm running, people are cutting across me to get in the dugout, but I start seeing the ground, little puffs erupting all around me. So I know the guy is shooting at me. So I turn to go out the gate. As I'm going out the gate, I hear a round hit one of the metal fence posts next to me. I'm like, okay, this guy is shooting at me. He's targeting me. A strange thing happened during all this. I had not one bit of fear, none at all. My mind almost was like a supercomputer. It became analyzing every gunshot on the ground, the trajectory, where the guy was, what I should be doing. My mind went back immediately of, okay, I was trained. What is it I'm supposed to do? Well, if you're under an ambush, first thing is seek cover, identify the location of the assailant. If you have means of fighting back, fight back. If not, plan a route to get to safety. So obviously, I have no way of fighting back against a guy with a semi-automatic rifle. He was shooting with an SKS, a Russian-made weapon. And so my thought is, I've got to get concealment. I've got to figure out where he is and then plan an escape route. There was a shed, a utility shed that was about 30 feet outside the gate. So as I turned to go to it, I went behind it, and I knew from where the shooter at least had started, I needed to get around the corner of the shed to get up front to be able to see where he was. What I didn't know is when I went around the corner, one of the guys, the assistant coaches following me off the field, had taken a round in the back and it came out his chest. He went around the other side of the shed as I'm coming up, and he's in front of me, and he walks over to where this Capitol Police SUV is, and he lays down, and as he turns, I can see he's covered in blood. Well, my plan had been, I got to find a way to get to safety. All I was trying to do is get up to see where the shooter was to know which way I could go to get to a more safer place. But when I saw him go down, it immediately changed and said, I can't leave now. I've got to stay and help him.
Right.
So I start moving toward him, and another guy, which happened to be a solid Christian believer, and I didn't really know him well at the time. His name was Brian. He was one of the assistant coaches. He had come around the side with me, and when I saw Matt go down, I started running toward him, and I heard Brian say, "Barry, get down, get down." I started to drop to my knees, and I heard something whisper right by my ear. I know exactly what President Trump heard during his assassination because I heard it. And so I go down, and then another round impacts the side of the shed right next to me. The shooter had come around the backstop, and from where I was, he had a opportunity to take a shot, and He shot over the hood of the SUV, and that's what he was trying to hit us there. So I went down. Without going into too much more detail, I stayed there with 10 feet between me and Matt, trying to get to him during this entire shootout, which lasted 8 minutes before other police arrived and was able to take him down. During that whole time, I'm trying to talk to him. One of the other agents was shot in the ankle. The shooter started because where we were, he couldn't get to us because of the SUV unless we stood up. So we stayed down, but he started shooting under the SUV. And I could see the bullets trailing the ground, and one of those hit one of the other agents in the ankle, and she goes down. Finally, they do take the shooter down. And regarding prayer, I'm thinking during this whole time, you're not consciously praying, right? Because my mind is too busy analyzing what I need to be doing, right?
I understand.
It's like the Holy Spirit took control and just said, it's adrenaline. It's your mind is processing. People say it's like time slows down. Well, to me, it's just like every function of my body sped up to match time, you know. So as they take the shooter down, I run up to Matt, realizing, I mean, he's laid there for several minutes, profusely bleeding, and I was surprised he was still alive when I got to him. But I was thinking, what is that I need to do? So my mind goes back, and you know this, we all had to learn first aid and buddy care, right?
Oh yeah, self-aid buddy care. Oh yeah.
The first thing I identified is this is a sucking chest wound.
Oh boy. Yeah.
This is exactly what we were taught, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So I knew I couldn't put pressure on it, because what if there's a broken rib and I punctured a heart or something? I'm thinking, what can I do? And God speaks to me, and he said, you use the power that I've given you of prayer. And so I go up to him, lay my hand on his head, and I pray for him. Now, I didn't know what I was going to pray as I'm going up, and I'm like, I don't even know him. I don't know the status of his soul, his salvation, or whatever. And God impresses upon me, you pray for his healing. And I'm thinking, are you seeing what I'm saying? I mean, he's already turned colors because he's not getting oxygen. And so as I pray for him, and I don't know the exact words I prayed, but I just tried to let God lead me. Matt survived. Amazingly, the first people on scene, you know, when I was hunkered down by the side of the shed, by the way, the FBI said I had at least, they could count 22 rounds shot at me. And during that whole time, my brain filters out the gunshots. I mean, it's just, I can see the trail of the bullets running down I mean, some of them are going within inches of me. But I'm just focused on my mission, not the circumstances around me. And Matt told me later at the hospital, I didn't even know if he knew I was there, but when I walked in to see him at the hospital a couple of weeks later, he pulls me and he says, thank you. You never left me, and I'll never forget that. Months later, he and I are doing this podcast together. It was on the anniversary, and we had seen each other, but we just never really talked about that moment. I went back to continue playing baseball on the team. He came back to coaching, and I think it was maybe the 5th anniversary of it. We were both doing a podcast, and he was asked, so what did Barry pray? He said, well, he prayed the Lord's Prayer. Well, that's not what I prayed, but that's what he heard. I found out later he had attended his first evangelical church service the Sunday before the event. Okay. That's what he was familiar with. But regarding faith and hope, we found out later there were 20 documented miracles that happened that day on the field. I'll give you an example of a couple. The Monday after the shooting, my wife had never been to the field. So when we flew into D.C., we left the airport. We went straight over to the field, and I wanted to show her, I mean, the shed with all the bullet holes in it where I was standing, and the bullet holes in the dugout and all around. And while we were there, one of the groundskeepers, the head groundskeeper, was there, and he came up and started talking to us. And he said that night before the shooting, he had a premonition that he should lock both of the gates. So he called one of the groundskeepers that lived a little closer, one of his employees, and he said, I want you to go lock both gates going onto the field. And he said, his employee said, well, the Republicans are coming for practice tomorrow. I think we should leave them open. He said, no, go lock them both. They do have a key to the first gate side.
Okay.
So he went and chain locked the gates. That's why the shooter never got on the field, because he couldn't get through the gate on the third base side. Had he gotten through that gate, it would have been a massacre. People would have been trapped. He would have probably shot 12 people just in the dugout. Two other quickly. One of them is the first shot that was taken at our third baseman is Trent Kelly from Mississippi. He's also an Army. He was in the Army Reserves. The shot was taken about 30 feet from him. That round, I mean, that's, point blank when it comes to a rifle like that.
Yes.
But it never hit him. We found out later that the round hit one of the small links in the chain link fence and deflected away. You see where it cut it. Another one was one of the Capitol Police officers, Agent David Bailey, who he and I have become very close since then, because while I was trying to help the two that were shot, Brian, who's with me, is actually giving Agent Bailey directions because he can see the shooter that David Bailey couldn't. So he was in the position to tell him where he is and what he's doing. Bailey had tried to go on the field to help Steve Scalise because he got shot within the first few seconds, and he's laying on the ground, fighting for his life. When he walks on the field, he pulls his phone out to call 911 because Capitol Police, we're 12 miles away in Alexandria, Virginia. Their radios just connect back to the Capitol, Capitol Hill, the Capitol Police, and so they weren't able to call for help. So he's trying to get help. The shooter turns and takes a shot at him, and it hits his phone and glances away. Mm-hmm. And I've even got a picture of his phone. But as we go back, there were many other miracles that happened. There were 20 documented miracles. And so people have said, there must have been angels on the field. Well, if you go and you think of these Hebrews, the definition of faith is the substance of things hoped for,
right,
and the evidence of things unseen.
Yeah.
There were angels on the field. Yeah. There were warriors on the field that day, but we didn't see them, but we saw the evidence of that all around us. And I started studying more about that afterwards. And just as you said, hope there's two definitions. The secular definition is, boy, I hope I get something for Christmas, right? I hope I get that new rifle for Christmas. That's wishful thinking.
Yeah.
The hope that's defined in Hebrews is a guaranteed hope. It's like looking in the future. We know what the scripture has promised us, right? Mm-hmm. And it's the substance of those things. It is what is building our faith. And this incident is as horrific as it was. This domestic terrorist attack was used to build my faith. Because if God brought me through that, he can bring me through others. And that was just the beginning of several other type things that my wife and I were going to go through, including an assassination attempt against us, what should have been a fatal car wreck, multiple rollover car wreck, and a train crash, all within a period of about 6 to 8 months. But God prepared us for all those, and prayer was an important part of that. But everything in my life that had built up to that moment was preparing me for that moment. And that's where God uses those types of events to grow our faith, to make us more resilient going forward.
Yeah. I was reading and having a discussion not long ago, we were talking along that line about God doesn't cause these things to happen, but he uses these things, the tragedies or the challenges in our life. And that's what you've described. Certainly God didn't cause that. Obviously not. But there are things that can come out of it if we allow him to. I remember what you described very vividly. as it was happening. But I remember before, uh, by the way, last Wednesday was this past Wednesday was the fourth anniversary of when we call them cancerversaries. It was the cancerversary of when I was admitted into the hospital for my treatment. And I remember very vividly that morning kneeling beside my bed, literally kneeling beside my bed. The doctor had told me I had about 3 weeks to live, but
Wow.
he said, we know how to treat this. So you're going to go in the hospital. You'll be in there for about 6 weeks, all that. And I asked him, I said, well, when am I going in the hospital? And he looked at my wife and he said, he doesn't understand. You go home, pack his bags. They got a room waiting for him. Well, in that little bit of time, as my wife was putting a bag together, I kneeled beside the bed and prayed. And my prayer was basically, Lord, I don't know what's going to happen with this, but I know you do. You've got this. So help me use this to glorify you. That was my prayer. And I was very much able to. By the way, I didn't stay 6 weeks. I stayed 2 weeks.
Wow.
The treatment was very effective. I went through another year of the chemo and everything, but it's amazing. You come out of an event like that, and it is life changing. And our view related to hope as believers in our Lord is I now have an opportunity to use this. And I mentioned to people, I volunteer now at our local cancer center, and I try to express to them in a kind way, you have been given a gift if you're using it to glorify God. And so that's what you're doing. And I
Wow.
appreciate that very much.
Yeah.
Obviously, one of the most traumatic events that anybody could have in their life. Even if this shooter was not aiming at you, you were aware of other tragedies happening in that environment. So it impacts us.
It does. And
Anyway,
I mean, this is, I've always been involved with ministries dealing with our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines that are coming back from combat and
yeah,
PTS and
yeah,
PTSD.
sure.
And I experienced it. I mean, I didn't realize, as a lot of men, it's just like, it is what it is. I'm going on with my life, right? I didn't freak out, and I never got scared. I never panicked. I just
Yeah.
did what I needed to do.
Hmm.
And I've had I met with some special operators shortly thereafter, and I appreciate some of the folks in the Department of Defense then. They sent some of their counselors over to meet with some of us. And I was talking to some special operators who ended up making me an honorary member of the Special Operations Committee because I wouldn't leave one of our comrades behind.
There you go.
Um,
Yeah.
but one of them told me, he said, look, you're going to face PTS. You have it.
Yeah.
There's no doubt.
Right.
He said, but you're still running on adrenaline right now. This is within a few days after. And he said, but let me tell you something. The trauma that you faced in a lot of aspects is greater on you than any trauma we would face in an operation. And he said, here's why. One, when we go into an operation, we're expecting to shoot and get shot at,
Yes.
and we're
Yes.
trained for it. He
Yes.
said, two is we have a way of fighting back. You had neither. That increases the trauma that you're under. And they said, we're just amazed that you stayed in the fight with both of those. I mean, no one would do that. And I was like, well, I was just, God empowered me to do this. I was just reacting to what I was being led to do. But I soon found out later, my wife and I would be walking down the street in DC. We didn't have a car there, so we walked most places. And a car would backfire.
Mm.
And I would be heading toward the bushes. I would be grabbing her heading into the bushes, right?
Right.
I went with my sons to a shooting range a couple of months later, and it was an outdoor range. We were just going to go do some recreational shooting. And as I pulled up, I opened my door, the back door to my expedition, and I was going to get my guns out when the range opened up. Next thing I knew, I was laying inside the car. I had, I dove in the car. And I started experiencing some of, to
Yeah.
me, most of the reaction would come if I ever felt physically or emotionally trapped. That's
Okay.
when I would have this anxiety, like I had to lash out.
Yeah.
And it culminated at one point as my wife, it was the movie Unbroken. It was about Louis Zapparini. If you remember, he was the World War II Navy pilot who was captured by I think it was Navy. Anyhow, he was captured by the Japanese and tortured. And after he came back to the U.S., he found Christ at a Billy Graham crusade. And so the original movie came out was about him and his survival and all this. Then the second movie came out was about when he started getting involved with the Billy Graham crusades, and he would have these flashbacks. And he was actually having a flashback of being strafed by Japanese pilots when he was in an elevator, and all of a sudden the cinematic aspect of it, he's in an elevator going to a business meeting when all of a sudden he starts hearing gunshots and holes are appearing in the elevator as it's filling with water. Okay. And they're dramatizing his flashback that he's having in that moment. All of a sudden my wife shoves me and I'm coiled up in my seat in the theater trying to get away from the gunshots.
Mm-hmm.
And so I realized, I am having some flashbacks of this, and including I would just zone out. My wife and I would be having dinner talking about something, and she would say the name Steve and talking about somebody else, and my mind would go to Steve Scalise, baseball field, and then I would relive that part of it, and I'd never hear a thing she said, even looking right at her. It was, let's see, June was when the shooting was. It was middle of August. I remembered the day. I was at home that week, and I was rebuilding the deck in our backyard. And it dawned on me that was the first day that I had gone the whole day without having any flashback of the shooting. And so I thank God for allowing me to go through that, because I can now better relate to those who are having those experiences.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
As it ended up, my wife ended up having some PTS because a few weeks after that, it was in September of 2017, we were driving back to D.C. We were on the interstate. We were getting ready to exit. It was late at night, and someone slammed in the back of our car doing 110 miles an hour, turned it sideways. It started flipping over and over down the interstate. We had to both be pulled out of the vehicle, ended up in the hospital. But she had a lot of PTS from that as well. I mean, any sound of a car wreck in a movie, she would react. And so as we realized, that was just preparation for some other things we were going to go through. But God sometimes allows us to experience things, and this is what I believe. He allowed me to go through these things, to experience these things, so I can relate to others in a way that maybe someone else couldn't relate to them that has experienced similar things.
Yeah. Something else I suspect that you experienced, I did, coming out of cancer, and it surprised me. It bothered me. It wasn't the level of intense tragedy that you experienced, but I experienced survivor guilt.
Wow.
I had a talk with my doctor one day, and I said, "Why? I'm feeling this. Why did I live? Why have I survived when I know so many folks who didn't, or have people in our church, for example, whose husband has died of cancer, or wife, whatever." And he said, "Dave, God's not finished with you yet. He's got some things for you to do." And I appreciated him saying that. First of all, as a man of science, you don't often hear that kind of an expression, but I really appreciated he said that. So I dealt with a little bit, not to the level that you're talking about, but PTSD is a very real thing. It hits me hardest on anniversaries of something. And so I understand what you're saying, and it really brings it home. And so again, I say as you've expressed, we've been given a gift to be able to turn around now and say, "I've been there, done it. Let me talk to you about that." One day at the cancer center, one of the nurses came over to me and says, "Dave, you need to go over and speak to that lady over there. She has the same leukemia you had." And, I went over there like a beeline, and
Wow.
talked to her about, here's what you can expect. Here's what's going to happen. And I said, you see that bell right there down the hallway? You are going to get to ring that bell. And so anyway, uh, Barry, I am enjoying this. Thank
Yeah,
you.
me too.
I've made a new friend, and I always appreciate that more than anything else. Let's talk about your book just a minute. Um, how the title is, and then they prayed.
Right.
Now, something that came to my mind, and I'm not critical of it at all. Please don't take it there. But when I heard that title, the first thing I thought of was, so they tried other things and then they prayed. Is that part of it, or talk?
Well, a lot of people say, what is the title? It sounds like it's the continuation of a thought, and it is.
Okay.
The idea is, and this book is about prayer through American history
Oh,
and
okay.
how, and let's see, I know we're audio, but this is the book. And if you'll give me your address, just email it to us. We'll send you a copy of it.
Well, I want to extend the same courtesy and send you a copy of my book on hope, but thank
Okay,
you.
great. I'd love it.
Oh,
The it spans from 1746 all the way up into the 20th century about moments in American history significantly impacted by prayer.
wonderful.
So the idea is it actually comes from something the great evangelist George Patton said. People don't
Uh-huh.
realize George Patton and
I
his
was
strong sense
thinking.
of so the story, and this story is in the book. The story happens during the Battle of the Bulge. It actually
Uh-huh.
begins 2 weeks before the Battle of the Bulge. Patton is in France. We have pushed the Germans back into Germany after the landing at D-Day. We go through Europe. We've pushed the Germans back into Europe. It's in December, but in France it's raining. In the Ardennes it's just blizzards and snowfall. So everything's at a standstill, right? What we didn't realize is Hitler was using the snowfall as cover to bring everything he had left on the other side of the Siegfried line, waiting for the opportunity to come through and decimate the American and Allied
Hmm.
forces that were positional. And we had brought in a lot of green troops. It's near the end of the war. In fact, my father was in Holland at the time, and he got assigned to Patton's Third Army. He was a medic. And so um, he said they all at the time thought we'll be home by Christmas. I mean, everybody knew the war was over with. Patton, in the meantime, this is 2 weeks before the Germans came through the Siegfried line in the Battle of the Bulge. Um, he was frustrated by what he called these immoderate rains because, Patton, he wanted to go. He wanted to be in Berlin already.
Right.
But the rains were keeping them back because, tanks can go through a lot, but mud is one of the things that's really hard for them to navigate through. So he called his chaplain in and he said, "Chaplain, is there a prayer for good weather for battle?" And
Uh-huh.
his chaplain says, "Let me go check the Army prayer manual." So he comes back and he says, "Sir, there's not one." And Patton begins a speech to him, a monologue about the power of prayer. It is amazing, and we have that in the book.
Good.
But he's teaching his chaplain about the power of prayer. And he says, "Look, what has sustained us since we landed on the beaches of Normandy and made our way through Europe without retreat, without famine, without due to the prayers of the people back home." He said, "But that is no longer enough. We have to be praying as well." And he goes on to say that prayer is like it's like plugging into a power source. And he says we have to carry the banner of God ahead of us, and we have to pray. And so he says, "I want you to go write a prayer and put it on a card. Put a Christmas message on one side, and I want you to put a prayer for good weather for battle on it. I want you to get 250,000 printed and give it to every soldier, every officer, every person in the Third Army." And along with that, he made an order. It was called Training Order Number 5, I believe, where Patton tells this about the importance of prayer. And it was an order to all the chaplains to lead everybody in prayer, right? So this happens 2 weeks before the Battle of the Bulge. Hitler attacks. We're in a huge retreat. I mean, they're just decimating us. He's making his way through. Patton is then mobilized to go relieve Bastogne because Bastogne is surrounded.
Right.
101st Airborne have been sent in. They're totally surrounded. There's no way they're going to stand, right? Because, and you and I appreciate this, our power then was with the Air Corps. Our armament, our tanks didn't match up to the Panzers, but we had air superiority, and our fighters could come in and just decimate them. But we were grounded because of the snowfall, because of the blizzards. And the meteorologists had said there's at least 2 more weeks of this weather. So Patton begins making his way toward Bastogne, realizing he's never going to get there in time. However, the day the prayer cards are delivered as they're en route, 2 days later, the sky's miraculously clear. All right. So Bastogne is saved. The Germans are driven back into across the Siegfried Line into Germany. Patton is then on the move. He's heading toward Germany. Weeks later in Luxembourg, his chaplain catches up with him. You know, the supply element is coming from behind. Patton sees his chaplain, and he walks over to him. And he takes his little whip, and he cracks the chaplain on the helmet, and he said, "Padre, our prayers worked." So clearly Patton was basically saying the victory of the Battle of the Bulge was because of the prayers. But the title comes from that story because part of the monologue that Patton was giving to his chaplain, he said there's 3 things that determine the outcome of any operation. It's planning, working, and prayer. He said the planning is the training, is getting our troops ready. The working is the actual battle, but the element that determines victory or defeat is that last element, prayer. And so in the introduction of the book, I say this is consistent throughout our history, is that we planned, whenever we faced, as a nation, faced insurmountable odds, our leaders planned, worked, and then they prayed. And so that's where that thought comes from.
I've heard not the detail of that story. I've heard about it before, and it is amazing. When I talk about prayer with folks, teach about it, I say there's something that I've observed in my study is that throughout the Bible, when God promises to answer prayer, he's talking to his children, either the children of Israel in the first century church. All of those promises of prayer are to his children. He will answer that prayer. If he chooses to answer a prayer for someone who's not a believer, for whatever reason they're praying, praise God for that. But if you want a guarantee of an answer to prayer, then become a child of God. And don't be surprised if you pray that the first response is become my child. And I use the example of Cornelius in Acts chapter 15. He's praying, and the angel appears to him and says, "Send for Peter." Peter comes and he teaches Cornelius the gospel. Cornelius and his family are converted and baptized. And so I tell people, just don't be surprised, the first one. But once you're a child of God, now you have the promise, the guarantee of prayer being answered. And that's just something I love to teach about prayer.
Yeah. And, you know, a lot of people don't understand this. After a lot of the events that happened to me and my wife, I really started looking into, because there was something happened after we had our car wreck. We're sitting on the side, after being pulled out of the car, we're sitting on the side of the interstate waiting for an ambulance. And my wife looks at me and she said, "You know, this happened for a purpose." And so I really start digging into why are we going through this? And of course, in the book of Romans, it tells us, and this is the hard part, take joy in your tribulation.
Yeah.
Right?
And James says, count all Well, I just drew a blank, but he
Yeah,
basically says the same thing in James chapter 1 about
that's right.
counting trials, looking at trials with joy. I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
Right. No, and that's exactly right. And so I started really looking into that, and that's when I started realizing these are like boot camps for us. But there's something else in the book of Peter. It
Yeah.
says, "Join me in the hardships as a soldier for Christ."
Oh,
Join me in the hardships, acknowledging that if you're going to be a soldier for Christ, you're going to face these things. But the other aspect of it is where Jesus says, I am with you always. I will never leave you or forsake you. When you start putting all this together, you start realizing something that I learned, and part of the inspiration of writing the book, and then they prayed, is we're going to face things, especially if you're doing the right thing.
yeah.
My dad always told me doing what is right, it's not easy, it's not often popular, and it's not convenient, but it is the right thing to do. And once you know what is right, commit yourself to it and then act. And so I learned through several of the stories in here, even the one from the Battle of the Bulge, where General Anthony McAuliffe, the commander, acting commander of the 101st Airborne, refused to surrender to the Germans, even though he was totally surrounded. We have that story in here. Is he was so committed to his cause that the word surrender was not in his vocabulary, right? You keep your eye on your cause, not the circumstances around you. That's what is consistent in this book are the stories from 1746, a miraculous storm that comes up as a result of prayer that turns back a French armada that was coming to decimate the American colonies, all the way up through the Apollo 8 space mission. And so in every instant, they're facing trials and tribulations, but they keep their eyes on their mission, on their cause, not their circumstances. And that's kind of like what we were talking about earlier, just keeping your focus on the day. Focus on the trials of the day. Don't worry about tomorrow. God will take care of tomorrow. And that's what's consistent in here, but the one common factor is prayer. And people have asked me, why is it important for us to look in our past? And we're celebrating our 250th anniversary as a country. And if you think about, people ask me all the time, can we survive? Look how bad things are. Can we survive? Well, if you look back in the book of Ecclesiastes, it tells us there's nothing new under the sun. This was written, what most believe, about 1,000 years before the birth of Christ, right? So you think about it on the time frame, 1,000 years before Jesus was born. The scripture is telling us there's nothing new under the sun. What will happen has already happened.
Yeah.
There's nothing that can happen today that hasn't happened in the past. So if, as a country, we can go back and look at what sustained us for the first 250 years and repeat that, then we'll be here another 250 years, or as long as God tarries, right?
Right.
And that is prayer, putting God first, and consistently at the most impactful moments in our history. And most of these are moments that we could have ended as a society at any moment or faced massive defeat. But because the leaders from George Washington, George Patton, many others had their eyes on their cause and trusted God, they didn't just pray and walk away. They prayed and stood their ground and fought, believing God was going to be there with them. And that's the thing I think a lot of, in modern Christianity, we're so afraid of facing trials or tribulations, is we just want to pray and let God handle it. But God needs us to experience things. Sometimes he does. Hey, I'm just going to take, there's times that, the Bible tells us he knows our prayer before we even pray it. And I've experienced that. There's that moaning within your spirit that God hears. And quite often he's answering a prayer before you even have a chance to pray it. But there's also those times that he needs us to stand firm for him. And he's going to lead us through, and we're going to learn so much from it that not only will we be able to help others through their trials, it gives us the faith. Like right after we had our car wreck was a couple months after the baseball shooting. I mean, at one part of that, I thought, okay, we're going to make it through because God brought me through something even worse than this. And if he took me through the domestic terrorist attack, we're going to make it through,
Yeah.
this tragedy.
Yeah.
2 weeks later, we were victims of an attempted assassination, my wife and I. Now, that was personal. Being on the
Yeah.
baseball field, I was shot at because I was part of a group.
Right.
The shooter came to assassinate Republican members of Congress. This was personal. This was targeting us. I
Uh-huh.
started mowing the grass wearing a sidearm. I mean, this is, and so God, that took a health toll on me, but that also, I had to rely on God's protection as well.
Yeah.
So each thing builds our faith as we go.
There's so many things, and it is so valuable to look back and learn from it, to be inspired from it. You said that assassination attempt was personal. Not only was it personal to you, but to that loved one.
Yeah.
And perhaps my thoughts were that would have angered me more than anything,
Yeah.
because your
And my
wife
wife
is
was,
obviously an innocent
yeah,
party here.
right.
How, how can somebody find that book?
It's on Amazon. It's at most major retailers. Again, it's called And Then They Prayed. But you can also go to andthentheyprayed.com, andthentheyprayed.com, or you could go to my website, which is just my name, Barry Loudermilk, spelled Loudermilk, barryloudermilk.com. And we'll also be putting information about future books coming out there. But I
Okay,
would
good.
like to share with you something quickly about And Then They
Sure,
Prayed.
please.
So this, we planned the release of this on July the 4th of last year. And we wanted to make sure we got it out in time for the 250th anniversary. In the beginning of June, late May, I had already gotten some pre-release copies that I had with me. I got a call from my chief of staff is that President Trump wanted to meet with me at the White House. And this was over a weekend, and he wanted to meet on Monday morning. So I flew to D.C. a day early. I flew up on Sunday, and I took some books with me up there. And as I was leaving my office to go to the White House, the last minute I thought, I'm going to take him one of these advance copies. So I sat down and I signed it and I wrote a note to him. And so the meeting was just he and I in the Oval Office with some of his staff. And he had called me over to actually seek my advice on some things and talk about some investigative work I was working on. And that was unusual because most of the times that I've been to the Oval Office or the Cabinet Room for meetings, it's been with a group of people. This time it was just us. And
Okay.
so when I walked into the Oval Office, I was escorted back. He stands up behind the Resolute desk and, Barry, come here. Let's get a couple of pictures before we get started. So I go behind the desk and we take a couple of pictures. Well, I hand him the copy of the book, and Newt Gingrich had endorsed it. I had some other prominent folks who had endorsed the book. And so I handed him the copy, and he pulls out a pen like he's going to sign it for me. I'm like, no, sir, this is for you. And so I had written on the inside cover a note to him, which started off, to my favorite president, which is kind of an inside joke because unlike other presidents, usually if as a member of Congress, if the president wants to talk to you, his scheduler calls your scheduler. They come up with a time that you can have the phone call. And then the day of the call, the White House Communications Office contacts your office and says, we need to get the congressman on the phone. So I get on the phone and they'll say, stand by, Congressman, for the President of the United States. And you'd hear Barack Obama's voice on the other end. The way it works with Trump, he calls
Yeah.
your cell phone and he says, Barry, is your favorite president. That's the way he answers, his greeting. So I put in there, to my favorite president, and he smiled. But then I put, to someone who has also experienced divine providence. And
Yeah.
when he read that, he pointed to his right ear where the bullet had grazed him. And he said, if
Uh-huh.
God had not told me to turn at that moment, I wouldn't be here
Yeah.
today. And I'm like, okay, he gets it. I fully expected him to put that book and leave it on his desk, right? But I wanted to give him a copy of it more importantly, I wanted a picture of him holding it with me, right? Because we're
Yeah.
getting ready to release this. So we got that picture. 2 weeks later, I'm back over at the White House. I'm not meeting with the president then, but I'm back over in the West Wing. And one of the staff members who was at that meeting, he said, Congressman, you know that that book you gave the president? I said, yeah. They said, it stayed on his desk for 2 weeks. He's been reading it. I'm like,
Wow.
really? So without any prompting or anything, in October, that was in June. In October, President Trump endorses the book through True Social. He just sends out a True Social one night endorsing the book. So, of course, we had to go back and get the covers reprinted because Newt got moved to the back cover and President Trump's endorsement on the front.
Okay.
But the staff telling me that he actually read it may
Wow.
have had significant influence on some things that he had done. And if you were to look at it, he really wants to make the 250th anniversary something big.
Uh-huh.
And so there is the American 250, which is the official government's organization that's made, it's funded by major corporations. Well, he's gone out and created something separate called Freedom 250. And it's organized and staffed, and it's part of its focus is the faith element of America. And in fact, I think my wife was telling me this morning, it just announced that I think it's May 17th, there is going to be a huge prayer gathering in Washington, D.C. at the Capitol for Freedom 250 that they're putting together. And on the website, there is an entire section for churches and Christians of what they can do to bring prayer back into part of our national ethos. And so, I think that, maybe the book had some inspiration on doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, I'll mention it offline. I received a personal letter from Ronald Reagan, and
Wow.
I'll tell about it. It meant a lot. I can only imagine getting something like that from President Trump, or I mean, even it doesn't matter. I may have disagreed with other political figures, but I honor, uh,
Absolutely.
as we're told to do in Scripture, I honor them and their position and the responsibilities they carry. You have given me so much time. Thank you. What a gift. Thank you. I tell people the most precious gift we can give somebody is our time because we don't get it back. It's there. So thank you for that. I have truly, truly enjoyed it. And I appreciate that you're a man of God and willing to step out and demonstrate that. That's what we do and we must do. Um, I wanted to look. Okay, so I've got your book information and the website. That's great. I'll put that on there in my show notes. Well, thank you, sir. I
Well, thank
appreciate
you.
it very
I've really
much.
enjoyed it. And we appreciate what you do. It's so incredibly important. And I'd
Yeah.
also say, um, this is what happens when you submit yourself to God. That realization came to me when I was actually flying on Air Force One with the president,
Uh-huh.
and we landed here at the Atlanta airport. He was giving a speech, and where the plane parked was about a mile from where I graduated high school. And
Okay.
I had mentioned earlier that
Oh
I grew
man.
up in low-income housing.
Uh-huh.
I had no aspiration for anything other than just live a quiet life, right? I just wanted a
Mhm.
job to get by, quietly have a family. I mean, that was basically, I didn't have any ambition or anything, but God had plans for me. But it took a huge transition. And that's what
Yeah.
this book we're coming out with later in the year is
Okay.
about, how God took me from where I was, very humble beginnings, um, to meeting in the Oval Office with the President of the United States, traveling to South Korea to negotiate on behalf of the United States with the President
Hmm.
of South Korea, flying on Air Force One. And as I was stepping off Air Force One, I looked over toward where my high school was. And I remembered getting my diploma and the principal saying, good luck, Barry. And I thought right then, there is nobody, because I barely graduated high school. I mean, I just wanted to get out of school. I hated school, right? and go on to work and do whatever. But as he said, good luck, Barry, I knew what he was saying. Yeah, we hope you make it. And I
Uh-huh.
thought nobody there, including me, would have ever thought that over 20 years later or 30 years later, I would be on Air Force One with the President of the United States landing at the airport a mile away.
And I'd say congressman. I mean, you can add so much to that. It's amazing. I
Yeah.
know. Yeah. All right. Okay. Well, let me wrap up, my friend.
All right. Thank you.
Friends, thank you for joining Congressman Barry Loudermilk and I as together we journey to hope. I trust in some small way we have encouraged you to discover, sustain, or regain hope through this effort. I invite you to contact me if you have questions or comments, or if you wish to share with me something you've experienced in your journey to hope. My email is info@ourjourneytohope.com. That's info@ourjourneytohope.com. And please share this podcast with someone whose hope is being challenged. I look forward to sharing more with you soon. Again, I'm Dr. Dave Layton, and thank you for listening. And until our next episode, remember, we give all glory to God our Father.